Hello viewers, welcome to this session of teleconferencing. Today's session is on the foundation course in Humanities and Social Sciences, which is developed primarily by the School of Social Sciences. Today's session being the first teleconferencing session for this course, what I propose to do in this session is divide this session into two parts. In the first part of this session, I would give you an outline of the entire course and what it contains. In the second part of this session, for roughly the larger part of this session, I shall be discussing one particular aspect, and which is the title of today's topic, which is on economic development, and that happens to be one of the blocks in this course. Now this course consists of 7 blocks. A block, as you know, is like a book. It is like a booklet which contains several units, and each unit is, you can think of a unit as being like a chapter in a book. So this course contains 29 units, that is roughly about 29 chapters, and there are 7 books which you will be receiving for this course. This course being the foundation for your study of other subjects in other social sciences, regardless of what you choose to take as your electives in your social science courses, like history or political science or economics, regardless of that, this foundation course, as the name suggests, aims to give you a basic grounding in some very elementary topics. Now this course consists of 7 blocks, as I said. Now let me tell you what the 7 blocks are, and then I will go on to talking about the units of these blocks. The first block is titled Human Society and its Evolution. This block just talks about the development of human societies in a general sense for the world as a whole, from the earliest times of mankind till the present time. So this initial block sets the ball rolling for this course by telling you how human societies emerged, how human societies were formed, and how they changed over time, from the very ancient, or rather the primitive times, till the modern times. Block 2 onwards, we get on to a study primarily about India. Since we are based in India, so our focus is to understand various aspects and facets of Indian life, Indian society, Indian social structure, economy, and so on and so forth. So block 2 onwards till block 7, we generally focus on India. Block 2 is called Emergence of Modern India. Now this talks of historical development of India in an outline form, but with some basic stress on the modern period. It begins with the pre-colonial period, then it talks about India in the colonial times, then post-independence India. After a study of India's national movement, we come on to post-colonial or independent India, right up to contemporary times and the challenges that we face in the contemporary times. Block 3 is a study of Indian society. This, as you study each block, you will understand that you are being prepared for a particular subject. Block 2, which talks of emergence of modern India, prepares you for a further study later, if you so desire, of Indian history. Block 3, which talks of the social system, which is titled social system, but you should understand that it means the social system of India. It talks of the social structure of Indian society. It talks of the social institution. It focuses on the marginalized groups, because that's a very important part of Indian society, and which continues to plague us, the problem of there are certain groups and classes in society being marginalized or deprived. So a special attention has been paid to the study of such groups. Block 4 is on the political and administrative system. You would understand, as I said, that this course, the foundation course, acquaints you with various dimensions, aspects and facets of the Indian life. We have talked of Indian society. After we talked of a history of India, then we get on to a study of Indian political system and administrative system. You understand the features of Indian constitution. We study the Indian bureaucracy. We study the meaning of democracy and the democratic institutions that function in India, how effectively or how well do they function, and what problems do they face. Are there any shortcomings in their functioning? All these we study in this block, fourth block, which is on the political and administrative system. Block 5 is on economic development, and this is something that we shall be focusing on today in depth. I myself have been associated with this particular block, so I'm not that equipped to speak on other blocks except to give you an introduction. We shall be discussing each of these blocks in greater detail as a separate topic in the course of subsequent teleconferencing sessions. But right now we begin with economic development, because much of Indian society is influenced by the economic structure and economic dimensions of Indian life. So we shall focus on economic development, but this is just one of the blocks in this course, and it is block 5. So block 3 is on social system, block 4 is on the political system, block 5 is on economic development, which means the economic system, the economic structure of India, which I shall go into greater detail a little later. And block 6 and 7 are very important. Block 6 and 7 is, block 6 actually is the humanities part of the course. I just said that this course, as you know, is titled Foundation Course in Humanities and Social Sciences. Social science aspect I have just elaborated. The humanities part, that is something about literature or the fine arts, is something that we take up in this block 6. Block 6 I shall be discussing in greater detail a little later when I discuss all the units, the 29 units, roughly give you the names and the basic content of the units a little later. But block 6 is on the arts, it's on literature, it's on Indian classical dance and folk dances and Indian classical music and folk music, on aesthetics in general, Indian theatre and contemporary arts like cinema and theatre and other arts in the electronic age. This is block 6. Block 7. Block 7 is again a block that is something like the first block. The first block, I said, is about human society in general and not so much about India in particular. The study of India gets going from block 2 onwards. Block 1 was about human society in general, how it emerged, how it evolved, how it developed and transformed over the years. Similarly, block 7, the last block of the unit, although the examples and the focus is on India, but it takes a broader picture for mankind, for humankind as a whole, for human society as a whole, and it talks of the present day scenario. It talks of the contemporary challenges and issues. Now it has issues like health. What are the problems of health that is plaguing mankind, from undernutrition to AIDS and other pandemics? There are issues on education that this blog discusses. There are issues that emerge from an information society, from electronic technology, information technology enabled service that we see all around us. The problems that emerge from all those, that is what is taken up in this block. And finally, an important issue of the environment. So issues like health, issues like education, the problems of an information society and the environment. These are the topics that we discuss. So you would appreciate that when we have developed this course, which is actually a revised version of the earlier foundation course in humanities and social sciences that we had, our aim was to make it both broader in scope but also without sacrificing simplicity of exposition and lucidity, we also wanted to get into a little more depth and acquaint you with a broad and a vast range of topics, so that when you take up the core courses in your study, when you take up electives, apart from the foundation we have to take some electives, you are in a position to choose and go into any direction that you would like to, whether you choose courses on sociology, whether you choose courses on humanities, whether you choose courses in economics, and so on and so forth. Now let me just list out quickly the 29 units that you have, and as I said, one block signifies a booklet. Every block, as you will see, as you have got your blocks, you can see the first block has an introduction to the entire course, that is called a course introduction. Other than that, each block has a block introduction which tells you about the basic theme of that block. The title of the block tells you the theme, but the block introduction elaborates on the theme a bit and signifies how the various topics within the theme are unified together, are cohesively put together, and tells you the titles of the units. So every block would have a block introduction. Then you get on to the units within the block, and one unit, as I said, is like a chapter in a book. Now you are probably aware that this course is an 8-credit course. Now what does a credit mean? A credit signifies a certain amount of study hours that you would be required to put in. 1 credit would be roughly equal to 30 study hours. Now that 30 study hours includes your reading and comprehension of the course, your studying of the assignments, your writing of the assignments, and all the other activities that you need to undertake to study this course. All these activities combined together, 30 study hours of such activities would make 1 credit, and 30 into 8, that is 240 study hours would be required on your part to do this course. Now I'll just very quickly read out the names of the units so that you are in a position to understand how many units are there in each block and how many different topics you would be required to study. They are all given very lucidly, in a very simple language with lots of examples, so that you are in a position to understand them quickly. Block 1, as I said, was on human society and evolution. It has 4 units which are called titled Studying Human Society, Evolution of Humankind, Emergence of the Modern World, and finally unit 4 on post-industrial society. Post-industrial society is what we call an information society, or today's globalized world, when we have moved away from the paradigm of industrialization into you had industrial workers earlier. Now we have developed what is called the knowledge workers. The services sector is more important, and there is information technology. So that sets the ball rolling for the rest of the course. So you have 4 units in this block. Block 2, which is on modern India or emergence of modern India, has again 4 units. Units 5 to unit 8 comprise block 2, and the first unit of this block, that is unit 5, is on pre-colonial and colonial India. Unit 6 is on Indian national movement. As I said, it's an important part of the emergence of not only the national movement, had the result not only of freeing India, but in the course of the national movement, certain philosophical underpinnings were there, certain ideological underpinnings there, which helped to shape the policy and the contours of development of modern India as well. The ideas and thoughts that existed during the course of the national movement of India shaped the thinking that went into, for instance, the development of Indian Constitution, which governs the entire political framework and the economic framework of India. So the national studying of an Indian national movement is a very important part of studying the emergence of modern India. Unit 7 is on post-independent India. As I said, what happened after independence in independent India. This is on continuity and change. Post-independent India continuity and change is the title of the unit, and this is what the contours of development in a historical sense of modern times, since independence, since 1947 till the present time. And unit 8 sort of ties everything together and talks of the emerging challenges that we see in today's world, because as we shall soon see when I get on to the discussion of economic development, that there is a very important idea of economic reforms that took place in India since 1991, and which has implications not only within economics, but it has implications for society as a whole. It has ramifications and it influences social, political and administrative development in all areas. So the emerging challenges are something that you need to study to understand the working of institutions in modern contemporary India. Block 3, as I said, is on social system. It again has 4 units. Unit 9 is on the social structure. Unit 10 is on social institutions. Unit 11, as I had earlier mentioned, was on the marginalized groups. These are very important features of the Indian economy, lamentable features, but nonetheless they do exist, and we need to study in order to have an understanding of the dynamics of the situation of the marginalized groups. Unit 12 is on social change and transformation. What changes have been taking place in modern times in the social sector, social sphere. So these are what is developed in the block 3 on social system. Block 4 again has 4 units. Unit 13, the first unit of this block, is on the Indian Constitution and its features. Unit 14 is on the democratic process, what we understand by democracy and what democracy means. Unit 15 is on the administrative structures and processes, the various structures and levels of Indian bureaucracy and Indian local government, both in the villages in terms of the Panchayat Raj system and in the towns, the municipal corporations and other local bodies. So various levels and aspects of the Indian bureaucratic system is something that is studied in the administrative structures and processes. Now a very important word in contemporary society is governance, which goes beyond the earlier notion of statecraft, and it is not merely the activities of the government, but an entire facilitating atmosphere that is created by the government, where the government and other agencies and other institutions all contribute to develop a structure which facilitates economic development and development in different spheres. This broadly it is called governance, and when you study this unit you will have a much deeper understanding of what is meant by governance, and the title is Governance, Issues and Strategies. Block 5, and this is something that I shall be discussing for the rest of the time that we have today. It again has 4 units. The block is on economic development, and it has 4 units. Unit 17 is on the structure of the Indian economy. Unit 18 is on planning in India, since India chose initially a process of economic development with the aid of economic planning, which has lost some of the relevance today, or some of the importance I should say today. And Unit 19 is titled Indian Economy and Appraisal. This means an appraisal of the Indian economy till 1991. What successes were achieved by the Indian economy till 1991? Where were the shortcomings? Were there any failures? Obviously the thinking at that time was there were failures, not only immediate short term as we shall see, but over a long term they developed structural weaknesses which necessitated a change in the course of action on the part of policymakers, and we adopted a new strategy which is broadly called economic reforms, and this is what is studied in the last unit of this block, which is unit 20 of the course, and this is titled Economic Reforms and Globalization. Globalization is of course something that we did not actually necessarily choose. It was not a voluntary thing, but it is an emerging emerging situation that developed for the globe as a whole, and since we are part of the contemporary world, we chose to participate in that process of globalization, and which again has implications for us, which is the topic of unit 20. Block 6, as I said, is important part of, from the humanities side, it is on arts and aesthetics, and it has again 4 units. Unit 21 is on literature, Unit 22 is on fine arts, Unit 23 is on dance and music, and Unit 24 is on cinema and theatre. So we understand about the fine arts with particular relevance to India and its comparisons with outside. For instance, the unit on dance and music, Indian music, for instance, the Indian classical music system, both the Hindustani and the Carnatic system, they are contrasted with Western classical music and the music in the Western idiom. So you get an idea of arts and aesthetics in India. And finally, block 7, as I said, is titled Contemporary Challenges and Issues, and it has 5 units, and each unit is on one of the topics that I had mentioned at the beginning. Unit 25 is on human security. Human security encompasses health, food security, the population problem, the demographic aspects. All this is combined under the title Human Security. Unit 26 is on education and awareness. Unit 27 is on information and communication technology, which is one of the core aspects of modern day life. Unit 28 is again very important in the wake of the situation that we see today, not only in terms of conflict between countries, both overt and covert, but also the menace of global terrorism that we see every other day. So Unit 28 is titled Peace and Conflict, and Unit 29 is, as I had mentioned, about the environment. It is titled The Question of Environment. So this completes the first part of my discussion today, and I hope I have been able to convey a flavor of the course, and not just the names of the names or the titles of the units and the blocks, but also an idea of the scope of the course and the basic content of this course. Now let me get on to a brief discussion in the time that is left of the 4 units that I said comprises block 5 of this course, which is on economic development. So the topic of today's discussion in detail is actually on economic development. Now it is economic development, the name of the block and also the title of today's discussion, but you must understand that it is economic development of India. We are focusing on India, and it has 4 units, as I said, and these units have been discussed in a very, very simple form for you to understand. It is not only a descriptive discussion, but it's also analytical. It not only says what happened in the Indian economy, but it also asks why did certain things happen, why were certain policies chosen, what was the thinking behind the choosing of such policies. Then it goes on to ask how successful have these policies been, and if at all, what have been the successes and what have been the failures of this these strategies. Now unit 17, the first unit of this block, is on the structure of the Indian economy. By structure of the Indian economy, it tells you the various ways the production, the distribution, the consumption and other aspects of the Indian economy are structured or arrayed together. For instance, as you would know, India even today is called a primarily agricultural economy. Now the reason for that is that India, a large portion of India's population, about almost 3/4 of the population, certainly more than 2/3, is still engaged in the activity of agriculture. So when you see discussions about industrial development or India's strides in software development and India's strides in information and technology and India's participation in the globalized world, as I shall be coming to, you must not lose sight of the fact that India is still primarily an agricultural economy in terms of the number of people engaged in agriculture. But it is equally true, as this unit would has explained, and as you study you would explain, that earlier where 60% of our gross domestic product was accounted for by agriculture, today just about 30% of the gross domestic product or India's national income comes from agriculture. So the importance of agriculture in the total product has declined, but the population engaged in agriculture is still of a very high magnitude. Now one would expect as the importance of agriculture declines, that of industry would increase. Now that has certainly happened, but what has not happened is that it has not limited itself to industry. On the other hand, what has expanded explosively in India is the services sector. Areas like various banking services, advertisement, education services, health services, information technology, all these, the services sector is growing at a very fast pace, much faster than industry. Restaurants, trade, transport, hotels, all these areas are increasing very, very fast. So this is the kind of structure that you have to understand. Another thing that you have to understand about the Indian economy is that if you look at the gross domestic product as a whole, or the national income broadly, India's rank in the world is something like 5th or 6th, or today it might even be 4th. Now, or you sometimes hear the phrase that India is the 4th largest economy in the world, or 5th largest economy in the world. True, India produces a lot of goods and services, so the total product of India is really very large. Now, does that mean India is very rich? It certainly does not, because the important thing that you have to consider here is the average income, or the income per head. What does the average person in India earn? How much does he earn? Now that is a very low amount. So India is among the poorer nations of the world. It is still a developing nation. So it's not even a middle income nation in terms of per capita, per head income, unlike economies like Taiwan or South Korea or Malaysia or Singapore, which were till recently, or even Brazil, which were till recently poor nations like India, but have now crossed over the threshold into a middle income nation, and China has just crossed over again into a middle income nation. Now, so the structure of India, when you study, you will understand that when you consider per capita income, a picture is very different than when you consider the national income just by itself. So that is another aspect of the structure. Now I am not going to elaborate each and every aspect of the structure that is presented in the unit. I am just giving you the broad nature of discussion that is presented in each unit. Now when you look at these structures of India, that would give you an idea of what is coming. Now you would understand and appreciate that India, it began during the British times not only at a level of development which was very, very low, but also a situation where for the 100 years preceding India's independence, under the British, the rate of development had been very, very slow. In that sense, the British, although the British did as colonial powers and primarily for their own interest, did start a lot of modern institutions in India. For instance, modern education, modern governance structures, the modern bureaucracy, courts, telegraph, railways, and all these things were established. But as a policy making agency, the British were not as successful as other colonial nations. For instance, Japan over Taiwan and other places. Japan as a colonial power for the other Asian nations promoted a rate of growth that was much faster there than the British promoted in India. For instance, India's agricultural growth and productivity was very, very low. India did have occasional and very frequent famines, droughts, and the public distribution system was negligible. So India started with a situation of a very, very low productivity. Then again, on the eve of independence, along with independence came the tragic consequence of the partition of the country, and that had an impact not only on agriculture, because part of the agricultural land, for instance, in the northwestern part of India, northern part of India and Punjab, a lot of fertile wheat area went over to Pakistan. So while that was Pakistan's gain, India lost out a little bit. Then again, one of the industries that had developed in India, among the few industries that had developed in India during colonial times, was the cotton textile industry and the jute industry. Now if you look at the jute industry, the industries were based in the western part of Bengal, and what today is called West Bengal, the industries, the mills and all, whereas the raw material usually came from the eastern part of Bengal. Now with partition, that side went over to East Pakistan. So again there was a disruption. So all these things, and then there was the dislocation of millions of people, lot of refugees poured into India, so that proved an excess burden on the government of India's resources to rehabilitate them. So you should understand the fundamentals of the situation of India prevailing on the eve of independence, and that is from where the Indian government had to start. Now when the Indian government made its policies, and that is what we will study in unit 18, which is on planning in India, you must understand why did India choose planning. Today there's a lot of talk about markets in India, there's a lot of talk about globalization, there's a lot of talk about placing trust and leaving things to the private sector marginally and saying primarily, and saying that the government should withdraw in most areas. But you must understand that the government at that time had very little choice. One, the British, not only were the British a colonial power, but it was also true that the British themselves found, along with India, in the midst of the Second World War. Now in the Second World War, when India was caught up under as a colony of the British in the Second World War, the Britishers, apart from their overall policies, also operated during a wartime economy. Now any wartime economy has places certain controls. It places controls on the movement of goods and services, it places controls on the prices, so that the traders cannot set their own prices, the prices are fixed. So there were a lot of physical controls imposed by a colonial government. See, India was a colonial economy. India had entered into a foreign trade with Britain from the times of East India Company, and the consequence and the implications of that were very adverse for India. What started off as a trade with East India Company went on to become not only unequal trade, but later the East India Company developed political ambitions, fought wars in India, took over the control of certain parts of India politically, and then the control of India, political control of India, passed on to the British government, the British Crown itself, from the East India Company. So what started off as a trade link with Europe ended up as a being colonized by Britain. Now that fear stayed with a lot of developing nations. Lot of developing nations had been victims of colonial power. One of the features of most developing nations, they share two common features. One is most of them happen to be in the tropics, so that they face a very severe summer, so that it is said anthropologically that productivity, say in agriculture and all, will suffer because of the heat and because of adverse climatic conditions. That is, if you look at the developing nations across the world, whether in South America or in Africa or in Asia, you will find most of them situated within the Tropic of Cancer and Capricorn along the equator, as is India. There's a little part of India in the temperate zone in Kashmir, but most of India is part of that. The second common point of all these nations is that they were more or less under colonized rule by some European nation, either Spain or Portugal or France or Britain. So a lot of these countries developed a skepticism about engaging in foreign trade. So after independence, in India, when Indian government had to embark on a strategy, India did not place much reliance on foreign trade. India did not want to export too much, nor did India want to import too much. So India operated on what was called a closed economy. At that time, India wanted to be self-reliant. India still wants to be self-reliant, but at that time this notion of self-reliance came to be to produce everything ourselves, try to do the best that we can with the domestic resources. Third thing that happened was that even the private sector in India, even private businessmen during the colonial times like Vishveshwaraya, and there was a Bombay group of industrialists in the colonial time, during British times, they had emphasized planning as a valid strategy. Now India had also had during this national movement a committee within the Congress which led the Indian freedom movement. Within the Congress, headed by people like Subhash Chandra Bose and Jawaharlal Nehru, who were in any case left of center, and they had looked at the experiences of Soviet Union, and at that time Soviet Union was growing very fast. Now what the Western nations had taken about 100 to 200 years to achieve, Soviet Union had achieved very fast. And when the West was having an economic recession and depression in the 1930s after the collapse of the stock markets in 1929, and then subsequent unemployment and recession, at that very period Soviet Union was growing very fast. Not only did it grow very fast, it faced Second World War. It had severe damages and loss of life and property, but it soon rebuilt itself without any foreign aid on its own. Not only did it rebuild itself, it became a world power which challenged America as a superpower. It became the first nation in the world to send a spaceship, a satellite and spaceship. So all these things were impressing India. So India was very impressed with the notion of planning as a strategy. So these are some of the reasons why India adopted planning as a strategy. Now, not only did India adopt planning as a strategy, three other things emerged. One, government would plan and plan the development of the economy. Number one. Number two, government would itself control and own the main strategic dimensions or the core industries, or what at that time was called the commanding heights of the economy. Not only did government control the defense and space things, that as happens in every nation, the government controlled most of the heavy industries, big machine industries. The government controlled most of the social sectors like education and health. But the government also, the most productive activities of the government was kept under its own hands. Secondly, as I said, the government was skeptical about engaging in foreign trade, so government had a closed economy. Government didn't want to engage too much in export and imports, so government kept a more or less closed economy. Third thing, even when the government allowed the private sector to operate, the government strongly regulated the private industries. For instance, that was done to ostensibly prevent what was called a concentration of economic power or the growth of monopolies. Now, India was, as I said, India had a low per capita income. Now, within that low per capita income, there were some people who were fabulously rich. From the earliest times, from the British times, people who engaged in financial speculation and who started industries did build big empires and almost were monopolies. For instance, the Tatas in steel or the Shriram group, they started in financial speculation, made money, and then got into some industries. So there were certain industries, certain groups which were very rich. Now, even with this rich group, if the average income of India comes out to be very low, then you can imagine what would be the situation of the poorest of India. The poorest Indian was really very, very poor, and a large, about 50% of India, about 47% of India was below the poverty line. So the government had an enormous responsibility to control and prevent the inequality or the disparity in income. So the government adopted things like progressive income taxation, so that the higher people in the higher income group not only paid a higher tax but also higher proportion of the tax, so that the highest income group paid something like 75% of their income gave away as taxes. So the government had a policy to control inequality, fight poverty. Therefore, the government very stringently tried to regulate the private sector. So if a businessman wanted to expand his capacity, he had to obtain a license. If he had to start a business, he had to obtain a license. He couldn't fire people without government's permission. He couldn't choose the number of people that he wanted to employ. So at every step, the people had to take permission from the government, obtain a license, obtain a permit couldn't go into certain areas. So the private sector, even where it operated in India, particularly in industry, was heavily concentrated in, heavily regulated by the government. All these things are discussed in Unit 18. Unit 19 does an appraisal of the economy from 1947 or 1950 as it were, because the first plan started in 1950 till 1991, when certain problems emerged around 1990. But I'll quickly list the problems that emerged, that we saw developed in 1991, which necessitated a change in strategy in what is called economic reforms. The first thing that emerged is, when one talks of government, one should not imagine the idea in India is to imagine that the government is always a benevolent thing, or the government is, we say सरकार ये करेगी, और in villages people say हमारे माई बाप हैं. There's a tendency to equate from the earliest times, like kings and nobility. Similarly, modern government is looking after, it's a paternalistic thing, looking after the benefits of the people. Now that may be true in theory, but in practice what happens is that it is governed by politicians and bureaucrats, many of whom have their own interest. This is precisely what happened in India. When you had the industrial licensing and control system, the bureaucrats who were in charge of issuing out the licenses, that fostered a lot of corruption, a lot of irregularities in development, and it also hampered efficiency. B, within the private sector, instead of controlling the private sector, it fostered monopolies and concentration of power within the private sector, because the big businessmen could manipulate the system, could cultivate the bureaucrats. The richest of them could pay bribes to the businessmen to get the licenses first. So it in turn, from a competitive capitalist system, it actually fostered a monopoly capitalism, so that the big, for instance, take cars. Before 1991, the monopoly of car production, because the government didn't allow foreign cars to come, didn't allow other car makers to come, what happened was it was controlled by a few groups like the Birlas and Fiat company. They had a monopoly in the car production. Same in other scooters. For the consumer, it meant if you wanted a scooter, you fill in the form, then you keep waiting for 2 years before you get a scooter. Or you want a telephone connection, if you ask your parents how they got a telephone, they filled in the form and they kept waiting. And if you want an electric connection, you have to go and pay bribes to the electrician to fix it. You think the consumer were in a bad position, the middle business, the smaller business were in a bad position, the retailers were losing, and within the government, it fostered. From then on till today, there's a skepticism in public mind. Sometimes we feel that the politician is necessarily corrupt, the bureaucrats take bribes, and that was all a legacy of the control system that India had. Now, all these structural changes, apart from some economic crisis that India faced in the 1990s, made India change the system. It is another fact that India, because of some problems, went in for a loan from the International Monetary Fund that you will read, and that they imposed certain conditionalities on India which India had to follow. So that also required a change in the economy, but India changed in 3 directions. One, India government allowed private sector to come in areas where it had not come in. 2, government loosened some of the controls over the private sector. And 3, government allowed a much greater integration of the Indian economy into the global world, both in terms of trying to expand India's exports abroad, also in terms of allowing foreign players to get into the Indian economy by investing in India, by not only investing in technology and in direct investment, but also Indian capital market. And the government allowed the controls to loosen. That was true in the financial sector also. So that was the reason for globalization, and today you find in some states even communist chief ministers are actively wooing private foreign capital. So you get a picture of the Indian economy, what was the scenario of the Indian economy, what was the structure, what was the performance, and finally how and why we went in for reforms and globalization. I hope you had a fruitful discussion, and if you have any question, you can write in to us at School of Social Sciences at IGNOU. Any suggestions, any questions, and we shall see you till the next discussion on this foundation course in Humanities and Social Sciences. Thank you very much.